Hi guys, welcome back to the next video. In this video, we are going to talk about how to write a YAML file. So what is a specific way of writing a YAML file? Now, I've created this folder called OPT software pods, and this is I've created on control plane. Now, do remember that this is an upgrade to an existing training, so which means that I'm adding as a content. That's why you see the names on this would be different than the one on the next video. So as per the feedback, I keep updating my training. That's a promise I've given to anyone who has enrolled for my training, and this is one of those upgrades which I'm doing for the existing training. So without any further ado, let's just write a very simple pod file. Now I'm going to show you how to write the pod file rather than just copy pasting, because in the next video you'll be seeing how I copy paste from my repository from GitHub. That's another way of doing it, but still, I want to update my video where in which people should be comfortable writing a pod, from YAML file. So that's basically what I'm trying to do. In the next video, I'll be creating a file in which I'll be writing the content of it. The file name would be called pod1. So I'm just going to do that heads up for you guys. So I'm gonna do pod1.yaml over here. The same exact content which is gonna be used on the next video is what we're gonna do right now. Now, I'll be explaining you on the previous video about the infrastructure of the YAML code structure with the internal complications and the spaces which you need to give towards separating your values and variables. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. The first two things which you cannot change or which you cannot, disable when you're writing a YAML file for your Kubernetes is the API version colon v1. So now there is of course a space required over here between the API version colon and the space you need to give, because this is a variable and this is the value for that variable. Now when I say v1, I could be definitely wrong. Okay, now it could be v2, it could be v1 beta, it could be v1 alpha, it could be anything. Okay, so we don't know what it is. Now we also don't know what is kind. So when you give enter in VI, right, you can see the tab space getting created over here. So this is a normal, the default option in terms if you're using the latest version of VI, which is available in the latest version of operating system. Now, this emphasized the cascading of how your, objects within a specific, items are going to be allocated. But the API version and kind should be at the same level. As you can see over here, API version and the kind is at the same level. And I'm making sure I give a space after the colon. So this is the hierarchy of writing a YAML file. Okay. And API talks about the actual kind of, API which you're going to use for this particular YAML file. Now, as we are discussing about pod, obviously you could have guessed I would have written pod over here. Now, I wouldn't have written in any other way rather than this. Now, why I'm writing in this way, why capital P is mentioned over here, and it's not pods, it's a pod, right? Now, there is a requirement, okay, that it needs to be aligning with the, the kind of hierarchy which is given already as part of this APIs. Now to understand the hierarchy, it's very much easy for us to do that. Now save and quit this file and then type this command kube control API resources. Now this command is going to show you all the resources available in your API. Now these are some of the resources which comes by default when you install Kubernetes. Now there is something called CRD as well, which we will talk later point of time, which is called custom resource definition. Now API resources are two kinds, to be very simplified way. One is what comes with installation. Another one is installed as a custom resource definition, okay, or CRD. Now what is custom resource definition is basically when you are importing some of the customized items which is not included by default or not part of Kubernetes by default. That's called a custom resource definition. Now, when you give an enter over here, you can see all those definitions irrespective of what it is you're doing. So all resources would come down here with its name. Some resources would have a short name to it. Now, if you have seen that we would be using later point of time, we'll be getting informations either with pods, or we can actually get information about pods using PO as well. Now, the name here defines the name of us, calling it from the command line, asking us to get information or delete information about this particular resource name or API name. Okay, so this is used from the command line perspective, or when you are interacting or operating with your components, API components. Okay, but when you're calling the components from a YAML file and you're trying to execute some kind of a deployment logic on your YAML file, then you have to use the API version which is defined over here with the actual kind name. Now, there are two different names over here. One is the name of your API resources where you would like to operate it with, and the kind name of that API resource where you want to invoke that particular API from your YAML file structure. Now, these are two different names, which is pretty much aligned over here, where you have every word is like capital letters, as you can see, and followed by another word, which is again having a capital letter on the start of the word. I'm sorry, letter. So every letter over here will be, start of the word will be having a capital letters. It is not following camel case. Only the YAML file variables carry YAML case. YAML is basically the first, camel, not YAML, sorry, camel case. Basically, the first letter would be lower letter, and from the second letter, the first word will be like, a capital letter. That is camel case. But the YAML file variable would be like that, but I'll show you that just in a second. But in terms of the kind, you can see that it follows all first letters of the word is all capital letters over here. Now, what is namespace? We will talk later when we are unlocking namespace. So namespaces are basically a separate segment within Kubernetes where you can divide services across segments. And the namespace will divide services into multiple segments, and then you have to use some kind of a technique to access item between namespaces, which we will again talk later. So this is pretty much the API resource over here, and this is very important for you to write any kind of YAML file invoking any of the resources part of your Kubernetes. Now you can see a lot of items over here. Now there is something over here which is called CRD, I told you, right? So these WebLogic traffic is not by default part of your Kubernetes. So if you just compare mine and yours, you wouldn't be seeing these as part of your API resources. Why? Because I've been using this virtual machine from AWS for different reasons. So I'm running these virtual machine from AWS console directly. So which means that I have used it for Oracle WebLogic and also for other certain services for my training purpose. Now, this is a very good example I can give you in terms of working with CRDs, customer resource definitions. So this basically means that I have installed resources which is not even part of AWS, but still I can use them, right? So that is what it is. So when you VI this pod, you can see that API version. So this is called camel case, where the first word is of the first letter is like lowercase, and from the second word, first letter of it will be in the uppercase. So here I've given V1. Now you compare that, it is the same value, and the kind is pod. This is exactly how it's given. So what do you want to know? What do you want to type? You want to type some metadata. Metadata is nothing but data about data. Okay. Now, what data you want to input is like you want to input your names. We will talk about labels later point of time, which we will add as part of metadata, which actually tells data about data. So this data of this YAML file, correct, contains data inside it, okay, which defines about this particular YAML file. So that is the data about data. So metadata colon name. So here, now you see that naturally I give a tab space over here. Okay, two spaces. Okay, so this space is to say that this particular tag comes below the metadata tag. Okay, now if I would have put a tag, if you would have put a tab space over here and a tab space over here, so what happens is like this metadata information is coming below this, below the kind pod, okay, which means that this is not applied to the pod itself, okay, because pod is in the upper layer, it's in the starting layer, okay, and after that metadata comes. But what I'm trying to do is like name this pod. If I want to name this pod, this metadata tag should be aligned with the pod so that it will actually name the pod. So that's why I'm not giving a tab space over here. I'm giving only tab space for my name, which is basically comes under the metadata. Okay. And this name is going to define the pod's name, my pod. This is exactly what I would be copying on the next video. So I will not be deploying this. You can see the deployment of this file on the next video. This is just to showcase how to write a YAML file. Okay. Now that you have written data about data, so here you can write a lot of information like labels, labeling what this is about. In the detail section of label, I'll tell you what's the use of label, because labels are beautiful. It is used to catalog resources according to the labels. So I'll explain that to you. But here, after you define your name, right, the next thing you need to do is like you need to go back to the pod, because you have not defined a lot of things about your pod. You don't know how many containers you're going to run in the pod. So because they are going to run within a pod, right? So for that, you need to define it in the same level as the pod itself, because we are going to give specifications to the pod, right? That's what we would like to call specifications. Okay, so for specifications or specifying what kind of requirement this pod should have, like a pod will have what? It will have containers. That's what we've been seeing on the architecture videos, right? So a pod will have containers. So you need to specify what kind of a containers is going to be under this pod. Either it's going to have one container or multiple containers. Those things we're going to define it over here. Okay, so for that, we just type spec for specifications, and then under the specification, so it cannot be within that specification, within the pod level, because the specifications are going to be under the pod, right? So you have to give a tab space over there and then type containers. Now here I'm not typing container. There is no keyword or variable called container, okay, because as I told you, under a specific pod, you have multiple containers. So that's why there is containers. Even in volumes also, when you go forward, you will see the words. So you have to monitor the word, what we are giving over here, because here, it's not metadatas, right? It's metadata. So you can have only one metadata. If I put a container, then I can have only one container to a pod, but I'm not going to restrict myself. So I can have multiple containers. That's what it has told me, right? So here I'm going to give name. I'm sorry. So the first word under this container should have the hyphen tag. So that's something which you should remember, the first word. So if I'm not giving hyphen name, I can also give a hyphen image. So it doesn't matter, but the first one should have an hyphen on top of it. Okay. So that's the default thing you should remember. And then every time you finish a variable, you should give colon so that you will get that blue color. So that's a kind of identification that, your syntax has come through. Okay. When you don't have the colon, you can see that it is white color, right? So the moment you finish it with colon, you can see the color changes, and then give a space, my hyphen container. So now here I've given the name of the container. So it is mandatory to have a name. Yes, because you're gonna have multiple containers. Now, how you would log into different containers if you're not gonna distinguish between your containers, right? The only thing which distinguish between each container is your unique name to the container. So you should always remember to have a name to your container, and then when you hit enter, you will come back to that same space. So you be on the same space where you are right now, where you are within the container to tag space. Now you're under the name, and then type images over here. And here in the images, you're going to type nginx colon latest. So here we are giving two items over here. So images is to mention without an image, your container would not be running because it needs an image to be downloaded from repository and then installed it as part of Kubernetes. Now it's not going to pick up your image from Docker image. I will tell you about that later point of time. I'm just revealing too much of secrets in this video, so please ignore it. And if it's too much, just ignore it. So it's not needed because we are going to cover that later point of time. It's very interesting training, to be very frank. So here, nginx is your image. Now, nginx is basically, I think I got the typo. Okay, so this nginx latest image, it tells you about the name of your, image name. Now we don't install operating system anymore, to be very frank, in part of when working with Kubernetes. I think I'm not told about it. We don't use operating system anymore. We use software names because the software name comes with a minimalistic operating system in it. So whatever is required for it. Funny thing, I logged into one of the container. Yes, you can log into your containers as well, and you will get an operating system. But the problem is like commands like cat, ls, less, sudo, su doesn't exist. So, which means that they made the operating system so lightweighted that it doesn't include the basic commands. So the only operations you can do on the container is by basically check the logs, but you don't have a cat as well. So in that situation, you have to check the log outside the container using kube control logs command, which we will talk later. But I'm just telling you that we don't use operating system anymore. We use the minimalistic operating system. So we still have options like you can install Ubuntu, you can install CentOS, all those things, but no one uses it. If you want to install curl, you want to try curl command. So you have an image for curl. So it comes with curl command with the minimalistic operating system. So the image itself is like 20 to 30 MB of a file size. Amazing, isn't it? So this gives you a faster download, a repetitive creation of virtual machine, even faster creation of virtual machines. Oh, sorry, pods, because the containers are so small and tiny and takes minimalistic effort to create it. And the latest meaning that it will download the latest version of this particular image. So there will be a tag or a link to the file. So they will normally have this 2.3.2. If that's the latest image, they will link it with .latest with that one. So it will download that one as the latest. Now 2.3.4 comes in, they will unlink that and then link the 2.3.4, which is the latest version. So when you download it, it will download 2.3.4 rather than 2.3.3. So likewise, that's how it is done in the background. Now here, just give another backspace over here. So come to the image and then type ports over here. I'm sorry, I forgot the colon. Under the ports, hyphen, container, colon, 80. I'm sorry, container, ports. Sorry, container port. So here you can have multiple ports as well, like node port, container port. Likewise, you can have, that's why it is called ports. Okay, so you can actually copy paste this 4YY and then P to paste, and you can actually change this name to container 1 and say that you will go for a curl command or Python image. Okay, so likewise you can change it. We will talk about this later, but it is so interesting, isn't it? So I that's what I love about Kubernetes, is that it's very flexible, and it's just like you have to design an architecture which is optimal for your requirement, and then you can execute that architecture. Thank you again for watching this video. This is how I will be doing the next video. So this is the future video on the past. Okay, so that's pretty much I want to talk about it. Thank you again. I'll see you on such an interesting video. So look out for such videos from future. See you then.